So FNAF has had all sorts of different little updates come out, even since my last video, which was just a couple weeks ago. But there's been all sorts of things like alleged leaks for FNAF Security Breach's new DLC, along with port news and all sorts of other things regarding Five Nights at Freddy's, more specifically Security Breach. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is probably the oldest thing, and it's the Five Nights at Freddy's DLC leak. So if you didn't know, recently FNAF Security Breach actually announced there was going to be a free DLC coming sometime in 2023. It's looking pretty cool, and based on the poster, we get a lot of information about it. Most notably, the ruined state of the original setting in the game, and what appears to be a new antagonist. Anyway, other than this poster, we haven't heard anything official, and that makes obvious sense because it's not expected to come out until some point in 2023. So I imagine the development isn't very far, but there have been some alleged leaks worth talking about. Most notably, Kane Carter on Twitter had tweeted, quote, "FNAF news, a significant leak of Funko Security Breach merchandise has been found. Initially reported by Pop News on Instagram. These may give us a hint to the upcoming Ruined DLC, since they are specifically referred to as Security Breach merch. The characters shown on the image included are Balloon Freddy, Circus Bonnie, Circus Chica, Circus Foxy, and 4-inch plush pack of 12. This is being sourced from Pop News, and since these are apparently labeled as FNAF Security Breach figures specifically, and that game has already released, that means these figures are probably for some new content coming in the future, hence Security Breach DLC. This is all coming from outside sources, so there's really no telling if this is 100% real, or if any of this actually even means anything, because there's a ton of different examples of code words and such for Funko Pops misleading people into believing there was some sort of leak. But this at least seems pretty interesting. Moving on from the leaks, we need to talk about FNAF Security Breach ports, because it's something I've sort of ignored up until this point, despite it being one of the biggest flaws with Security Breach. Because I'm assuming you're aware that at launch, Security Breach was a PlayStation exclusive title along with PC. The entire goal of this deal was to initially sell more PlayStation consoles, and they did that by not releasing it on Xbox or Switch or any other console where there were a lot of people who wanted to play it, and presumably Steelwool Studios got paid a lot of money for this. But in the end, at launch, it was only on PlayStation consoles, which meant that unlike a lot of FNAF games where nowadays especially they're accessible to a multitude of consoles, unless you had a PlayStation or a computer, you were pretty much out of luck. And the reason for this is because there was a contract with PlayStation for promotional reasons that forced Security Breach to release exclusively on Sony consoles for a total of 3 months, which meant that the exclusivity deal would have ended sometime in March, and they from that point forward would be allowed to start porting onto other consoles. And it seemed like that's the direction that they were headed. But the first place they were planning on porting the game of all places turned out to be the Google Stadia. This was honestly a little bit of a questionable move, if I'm being honest. Not because there's really any harm in putting the game on Stadia, just that the performance could be somewhat questionable, since this has been a major problem in the past for other consoles that are probably a lot more qualified to be running a game this large. In fact, the Stadia port just launched here on July 1st, and while I'm not committed enough to drop an extra $40 to see what the game is like, I have already seen some people complaining about there being some performance issues on the game. However, to really know, we'll just have to take some time to tell how good it really is, because realistically, it's going to take a long time for people to get around to playing it on Stadia, because not very many people play the Stadia. But anyway, speaking of ports, we also know that there's going to be an Xbox port of the game as well. And we know this because on Twitter, Steelwool posted a little VHS commercial, which is funny since Security Breach is supposed to take place in the future. But anyway, in this, we could see from the ball pit a physical version of Security Breach being dug out, which to our surprise is going to be on Xbox. This is the big port that I think everyone has really been hoping for above all. So it's nice to finally see this coming out, especially since there was a recent update that optimized console versions a lot. So I guess we're seeing it's finally time to start porting it out to other consoles, with the hopeful goal of giving them the flawless first experiments that most people who played it honestly didn't have. Moving on to some slight fan game news, there's this brand new Pop Goes game from the Fanverse Initiative that also literally just came out, and although I'm not too invested in the Fanverse, let me know if you want to hear me talk about all the stuff that's been going on with it, because there's been a lot if you didn't know. But in the meantime, in the Fanverse, we at least have some good news seeing this game finally come up and finish, especially since it was such a hype title. Also, speaking of hype, the Living Tombstone actually made a brand new Five Nights at Freddy's song once again. Now, I'm not sure how invested you guys are in FNAF music, but I know that a lot of people obsess over it, and easily the biggest musicians behind these FNAF songs is the Living Tombstone. But up until this point, it had been 6 years since they've made anything FNAF related, so seeing them come back with something like this is actually pretty nostalgic, especially after the old FNAF music had sort of regained popularity over in places like TikTok. Scott Cawthon seems to be back as well, at least kind of. I know that he has sort of been in this limbo between starting to retire, yet still is helping the FNAF community, especially with his own own projects like the Fanverse Initiative. But basically, in a recent live stream chat of Dalco's, all he said was that there's a lot of big stuff happening this year and to stay tuned. I imagine that all of this is referring specifically to the Fanverse, along with maybe some new movie news, because we already know Steelwool was working on the Ruin DLC, which won't even be coming this year. So those two things are really the only things that we could really be expecting at all for FNAF, unless something were to come up that we weren't expecting. But it's still very sweet, honestly, to actually see Scott Cawthon himself say this, because more than anything, I've been fearing that with his retirement, FNAF would become over-industrialized, and all the news would be given by these big companies with their official announcements and whatnot, unlike what we had seen before Scott's retirement, where he would actively engage with his audience. But it seems like despite this retirement, he does still have a lot of ties to FNAF and is still engaging with everybody, but also how could he not? I mean, he is and probably always will be the sole idea behind FNAF, so no matter how retired he is, if these other companies are wanting to push out the next new movie or book or video game series, Scott has to be the one behind it in some way because he literally owns all the Five Nights at Freddy's values as a whole. Anyway, the last and most interesting thing I want to talk about is something I'm also super late to, but apparently there's actual real talks of Five Nights at Freddy's security breach coming into Fortnite. So for some context, Epic does these little surveys every once in a while to collect information on who to collaborate with in their game Fortnite. And as we know, this has led to some weird collabs from Star Wars to Marvel. Anyway, these surveys, originally in January according to Johnny Blocks, started to show some actual FNAF security breach characters like Glamrock Freddy and Monty. This gave people some hope of there actually being some sort of Fortnite collaboration in the future, but this was 6 months ago, and once again we're hearing about this collaboration. Again, from Johnny Blocks, we get a list of all the survey characters, and we see Vanessa, Monty, and Glamrock Freddy showing up on these surveys. So there's been a slight theme here throughout these past few months, and the fact that they're still including these characters is telling me that there's actually some real potential this collaboration could come. Is this a probable thing? Honestly, no, because there's been Fortnite collaboration talks ranging from Juice WRLD to Banjo-Kazooie, so there's a wide range as to what could be in Fortnite, and clearly they have a lot of options in regards to who they want to pick. But the fact that it's still showing up does mean that there's at least some people talking about it and considering it. I've never gotten any of these surveys because I don't really play on Epic Games, but if you have, let me know if any of these characters actually showed up. Although, as cool as it would be for this collab to happen, is it something that everybody realistically wants? I'm not exactly sure. I personally don't really care for it. I mean, it's not like I'll get all excited if FNAF comes to Fortnite, but that's not to say it won't be interesting to some extent. I just hope that this whole collaboration thing doesn't go too far, and in no time Fortnite turns into weird crossover fights of Rick, Glamrock Freddy, and Huggy Wuggy cranking 90s against each other. Anyway, let me know if you enjoyed this news monthly recap style video. Check out my update video breakdown here, subscribe, and peace.